1930, America's elm trees began dying. A killer epidemic swept across North America, leaving dead in its wake our most majestic shade tree, the American elm. Since then, over 56% of our nation's elms have died.
The disease spreads easily wherever there are high concentrations of elms. In the Western Plains states, that's both a benefit and a liability. Scattered throughout the region are pockets of highly concentrated human activity and concentrated palm trees. The communities are actually isolated from one another by broad expanses of open plains, farm, and ranch lands. That makes control of the disease easier on a regional scale, but also makes treatment so critical within any community that has sustained a Dutch elm disease infection. Dutch elm disease is caused by a fungus that blocks the water uptake vessels in elms, primarily American elms. As the fungus invades the system, the water is choked from the leaves, causing the tree to wilt and die. The fungus is carried to healthy elms by a tiny bark beetle. While breeding inside infected trees, the beetle unintentionally picks up spores of the fungus on its body. The open spaces in the West create a barrier to the beetle. It's not impossible for the insects or the disease to spread between the communities, but it is easier to control than in the East. There, communities are surrounded by forests of naturally occurring elms, which continually produce new generations of beetles, making long-term control more difficult. The first step to control Dutch elm disease is a tree survey that determines which elm species exist and where they are. The surveillance provides an information base on which all further recommendations for treatments, the intensity of control techniques, and ultimately the success of the program will depend. Year-round, survey crews locate, map, and record notes about the condition of the elms.
On a symptomatic survey, we look for flagging, which is any obvious wilting or drooping of the leaves on a branch. Here's one right now. These are fairly advanced symptoms, and so they're very obvious. On the right, you can see green leaves that are drooping and wilting, and higher up on the branches, you can see brown leaves in a more advanced state that are totally shriveled.
If an elm is flagging, or if tiny emergence holes from the beetles are noted on the tree, a sample twig is taken. A brown stain or streaking in the sapwood also indicates the possibility of Dutch elm disease infection. However, these symptoms can be caused by other diseases, so a laboratory confirmation is necessary to make a positive identification. The key to Dutch elm disease control is in prompt detection of the problem, and then swift measures to control the spread of the fungus. The most important step toward control is prompt removal and disposal of all dead and dying elm wood. The beetles breed just beneath the bark of the dead elm trees and branches. When the adult beetles hatch from the egg, spores of the fungus attach to their bodies. Dutch elm disease is then carried to healthy trees when the insects emerge to feed. Sanitation of the elm wood helps prevent invasion of the disease by eliminating potential breeding sites and thus controlling the beetle population. Both American elms and Siberian, or Chinese elms, can harbor breeding beetles, and even a pile of elm firewood could be used as a brood site. Therefore, all elm wood must be removed and disposed of as quickly as possible, before another generation of beetles is produced. Thousands of beetles can emerge from a single infected tree. So, with the beetle serving as the disease carrier, the spread of the fungus is rapid and very difficult to control.
But experience in Dutch elm disease control has proven one very simple but important fact. If you control the beetle population, you control the rapid spread of the fungus. Sanitation eliminates the sources of contamination and the breeding sites for the beetle. It's the most effective of all available treatments. But if supportive treatments are added, the chances for a successful control of the disease increases even more. The second line of defense, then, is insecticide spraying.
A chemical insecticide is sprayed on the elms, killing the beetles on contact. Added to a program of strict sanitation, the insecticide increases the effectiveness of the overall control program. If no fungus existed, the beetles could go about their business with little or no harm to the elms. But since they spread the disease so effectively, they must be controlled. The fungus can spread underground through intermingling roots if the trees are planted within about 40 feet of one another. Transmission of the disease through root grafts is just as deadly, although the spread is much slower and easier to control on a large scale than the bark beetles. The third control technique, mechanical trenching, severs the root system and creates a barrier for the fungus.
The ideal Dutch elm disease control program for the western United States would integrate all these treatments. To be most effective, each treatment would be applied annually to keep the losses at a minimum. It takes time, effort, and of course money. But the cost of not controlling the disease is even greater.
Uncontrolled, the fungus spreads at a rate of 3 elms stricken for each infected elm left standing. That means a city like Denver could lose all of its remaining 18,000 American elms within just 9 years if the disease was left uncontrolled. The losses in property values and removal costs would be more than would be spent annually for control.
Sadly, the epidemic we face today was, in a sense, avoidable. It's actually the direct result of inadequate planning and foresight by our predecessors.
In 1905, a tree giveaway program is begun in Denver. At its peak, 20,000 maple and elm trees are given to homeowners during one spring season. Today, the city of Denver has beautiful tree-lined streets as a result, but also battles to save its elms from Dutch Elm Disease.
By planting too many trees of the same kind, the settlers created an open invitation for a widespread disease epidemic. So we have the opportunity to learn from that experience, but all too often we recreate the mistakes from the past.
Too often, we do not adequately plan ahead to avoid the long-term problems which plague our urban forests. Mass plantings of honey locusts in the region are already suffering from Thyronectria canker, a disease which is approaching epidemic proportions in some areas. The segmented and haphazard way in which trees are selected can result in monocultures and stagnant or weak urban forests. And like the settlers, we really don't know what kind of problems we might be creating for the future.
This apple tree has firefly, and it was probably introduced into the apple tree by honeybees.
Many communities have expanded their commitment to control Dutch elm disease into a long-term commitment of total management for their community forests. Applying the concept of preventive care, they are assuring that some future disaster might be avoided. Community forestry programs vary in form and structure, but the purpose and goals are almost always similar. The program might consist of a group of citizens sharing a common interest, or it might be just one highly motivated individual.
Yuma has been a very successful community forestry program. One of the main reasons I contribute this to is one individual, Marvin Salvador. He has been the key to this whole success.
1974, after working through the year of 73 with John, and he explained the problems with Dutch Elm Disease to us, we organized the Yuma Community Tree Board. What we're doing right at the present time is trying to stay on top of the program, removing any trees that we see as a problem, and we get reports back from the State Forest Service. And we started a nursery plot in 1976. So it doesn't really take dollars to promote a tree program. It just takes a lot of dedicated people and a lot of interest.
In contrast, One community forestry program in Denver is equally as effective, but dramatically different. The complexities of a larger community may require more and varied resources, but also offers more. The Parks People, a large non-profit citizens group, has taken advantage of those resources in their fundraising efforts.
Their tree committee mainly gets funds through grants from foundations and businesses in the community. These grants will run anywhere from several $100s to several $1,000s. The one main project that the Parks People Tree Committee group had this year was the Atlantic Richfield planting. The Parks People got the Atlantic Richfield group together with a neighborhood association, the Congress Park neighborhood, to plant some trees. An area was located that was basically treeless, primarily due to losses from Dutch Elm Disease in the past years. And Atlantic Richfield Company donated about 16 trees to be planted on that 2-block strip. And then the neighborhood association made a community involvement program.
The community forestry program must begin and continue with the interests of local people. When formed as a group, they may be called the tree board, a citizens advisory committee, or a service club. But regardless of the name, they form the heart of any community forestry program.
The range of activities of a tree board will vary from community to community. A newly developed tree board, for example, may just be involved with information and education. As a tree board develops, gets older, we may find them getting involved more in the planning stages of the community forestry activities. Examples may be getting involved with the writing or preparing of ordinances. They become an advisory group to the city council. In communities where a city forester or a city arborist may exist, doesn't mean that a tree board could not exist. In most cases, a city forester is busy with regulations and parks and so forth, that they really do not get out to the citizens of the town to tell them how they should be taking care of their own trees. A tree board could be very essential in that instance.
Regardless of the structure, the name, or the projects involved, a true community forestry program is more than concerned individuals working as individuals. Each program will have 3 basic elements in common: planning, coordination with professionals, and a sustained commitment to action.
The key to community forestry programs lies in the capability for planning. Proper planning prevents the problems of the future and provides adequate care and maintenance for the trees of the present. The program must coordinate the efforts and interests of the community with a professional who provides guidance and technical expertise about trees. Finally, a community forestry program is action-oriented. Various projects and activities undertaken by the group provide solutions to problems.
We had, on the latest survey, we had 2 diseased trees. One of them was at the Yuma Cemetery, which was removed right away. We had one other diseased tree up here on South Main, and that tree is being removed today.
The first priority of a community forestry program would be to control any lingering Dutch Elm Disease problems. In fact, many programs started that way. But other insect and disease problems can also be fought through sound community forestry. Throughout the community, a diversity of tree species makes for a pleasant neighborhood and prevents the chances of widespread losses to insect and disease damage by eliminating prime conditions for future epidemics. Healthy individual trees are better able to withstand the rigors of elm leaf beetle damage, the stresses of Thyronectria canker on honey locusts, or fire blight on apple trees, for example. Like controlling Dutch elm disease, management of the urban forest begins with an inventory of the trees that already exist. Tree board members actually help identify and catalog their neighborhood trees.
Well, we need to look at, first of all, what kind of tree it is, okay, as we walk down the street. We'll determine the type of tree, we'll determine about the height, approximate height, what condition it's in, whether it's good, fair, poor, dead, or dying, and so forth. And on these forms you have, Jake and Pearl, there's blocks where you can mark down, like the species. We have American elm, ash, and so forth, and the size of the tree. We'll have to estimate what diameter tree this is. And Phyllis, on this, just kind of keep track of the one's condition of them, whether they're good, poor, dead, or dying.
When the inventory is complete, they evaluate the needs of their community and develop a master plan for the future. The plan will include recommendations for new tree species, planting locations, and maintenance guidelines.
Determine the proper space to plant a tree. I think one of the key things we need to remember is that tree selection and proper placement is one of the critical factors in a good community forestry program. First consideration you have to go through is determine how much space you have. If you only have a tree lawn of 2 feet, your trunk will get too big, you'll upheave the sidewalks and break the curb. The trees will not have enough moisture and nutrients to grow properly. Shape of the tree will determine, obviously you can see here, that if you've got a sidewalk real close to here and you've got this spreading branch habit, it's going to go way over the sidewalk and way over the street, require more pruning and maintenance to keep above the street and sidewalk. Whereas in that case, you may want to go with a pyramidal shaped tree. And obviously if you get a power line coming across here and you plant a large tree, the first thing that the utility companies will do is shave off that tree, and then you got this butchered.
The community forestry plan may include workshops and guidelines for other citizens and utility companies to keep tree damage and maintenance at a minimum.
I think what's the problem here is a few years ago we had a real bad drought. And because this tree happens to be real shallow rooted, while the water just was not there for the tree to grow, so it started to die back from the top.
With the help of their professional resource person, members of the tree committee might conduct workshops about planting or tree care for private homeowners.
The main reason for pruning trees is to improve the vigor of the tree. You eliminate those dead branches that will attract insects and diseases. You eliminate those branches that will create future problems, whatever they may be. By eliminating those branches, you improve the tree. You improve its looks and you improve its life.
The Dutch Elm Disease epidemic served a costly but useful purpose. It proved that we must care for and manage our urban forests. As we've seen, community forestry provides long-term solutions to many of the current problems in our urban forests, but it serves an even more important role, that of preventing problems through careful planning. The growth of trees, the subtle changes in the community, the alterations to the landscape are often so slow and gradual, we tend to overlook their long-term consequences. A community forestry program is a commitment to the future as well as the present. So a community can, for example, plan a Dutch Elm Disease control program, but also plan to replace the dead elms with a fresh mixture of tree species. Once that commitment is made, it's the people who enjoy the unlimited pleasures of their neighborhood trees and all the benefits of a sustained urban forest.